Hi, everyone. Kumar Tran here with Agile Meridian, and we are back with our next episode of the X-Scale series. And in this episode, we're going to be continuing our discussion on permaculture principles and their relationship to ecosystem thinking principles. So we got lots of words there: permaculture, ecosystem. I'm just going to remind viewers what we talked about last time. So permaculture principles, and Glenn will have a better description of what they are. And they describe sort of a set of principles to sustainably farm natural resources, food, crops, and things like that from the earth, much more so than we do today. And there's a set of principles that sort of manifest how humans can sustain farm the earth without throwing things out of balance. And Peter Merrill wrote a set of ecosystem thinking principles that are inspired by them. And so in our first episode, we compared and contrasted the first two permaculture principles with the first two ecosystem principles. Watch that video. It was on about a month ago. And today we're going to attempt to break down the next two permaculture principles. So before we get started, I don't think I did a very good job, Glenn, of describing permaculture. You want to take a stab at that?
Sure. The key thing that jumps out to me about permaculture is the permanent nature of it. Both organizationally and agriculturally, we tend to go and do things in a non-sustainable way, as you said. Artificial fertilizers, monocrop cultures, things that deplete the soil in 30, 40, 50 years and require replenishment. And gosh, wouldn't it be a much better idea if we just looked at the way nature does it? Nature has a diverse set of plants, and as long as we stay out of the way, they keep growing, they keep replenishing themselves. There's a profound principle there that is efficient, saves the earth itself, but they're also very energy efficient. And humans tend to bring in these very energy inefficient systems that, as you said, are not sustainable. And there's something profound there. And it's disturbing. The same principles in industrial agriculture do seem to be applied to corporations, industrial corporations, if you will. And all these bankruptcies, it's painful, it's disruptive, and it's very wasteful of capital. Sure, you make a bit of money in the short term, but why not go and have a more sustainable foundation inspired by nature, where an awful lot of good ideas come from, and have something that's durable and that will adapt to changes in the environment, changes in the market. That's my take on it.
I like that. So the third principle, permaculture principle, is very simple. All it says is, and it states is, obtain a yield. And so from a permaculture standpoint, what that means is really sustainable design solutions need to provide rewards and yields that encourage their growth and replication. Obviously, in nature, a farmer isn't going to plant something if it doesn't obtain a yield, right? It has to be a meaningful yield, or they will stop planting that crop. And so in modern societies, of course, we've sort of upset the balance. We pump fertilizers into the ground and we get more yield because of that. But in the process, we strip the topsoil, the ground, the land of its ability to support further yields.
Yep.
Right. And so in permaculture, it's about obtaining a yield, but in balance, in a way, in balance with what nature can provide and what nature can yield.
And also,
go ahead.
Sorry, and it's also adaptive. If you're in a particular area where the soil is dry, you won't just blanket go and do the same thing you did somewhere else. It will adapt in real time to the conditions. And there's some plants that like drier soil, some plants that like more moist soil. Nature figures it out. We always seem to apply a one-size-fits-all model, and that really doesn't work very well.
Right, and I think that at its core, obtaining a yield needs to be balanced with ecological rationalization rather than economic rationalization. It's not all about the economic benefits of obtaining the yield. It has to be in balance with the ecological impacts of obtaining that yield.
Otherwise, you're eating your seed corn and you're depleting things, and bad things are going to happen.
Right, exactly. And so what does this have to do with the ecosystem principle of work on outcomes? I'm reading this verbatim. This is Peter Merrill's third principle of ecosystem thinking. Work on outcomes. Teams continuously quantify their contributions to business throughput, prioritize the current bottleneck, and minimize work in progress. What does that have to do with obtaining a yield?
So many organizations are focused on measuring outputs, not outcomes. That again is a very short-term focus, rather similar to a farmer just focusing on how many bushels of wheat they got without looking at what they're doing to the soil and what will they need to go and spend to replenish that soil. Corporately, if you are looking at outcomes, you're looking at the values and the things that are important, and you're focusing on them as opposed to a short-sighted metric. You're also, the other key point that jumped out at me in this principle was focusing on top-line business throughput.
Mm-hmm.
You should affect the top line. It should apply to revenue, and if not, why are you doing it?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, some of the things that actually make me think about how these things relate. Both of these principles emphasize designing systems, as you put it, that generate useful yields or outcomes, not about the outputs.
Yep.
Right. Permaculture focuses on productive environment. Ecosystem thinking focuses on teams producing quantifiable outcomes to business throughput, as you put it, top line business throughput. Right. So in that way, they're very, very much aligned.
There's a couple of Kanban principles thrown in there as well. Focus on bottlenecks, eliminate them, and minimize work in progress. I have clients that don't seem to get this notion of minimizing work in progress. You have 10 things going on. If you're treating them all as equal priority, well, you're not going to get done until the last one is done. Like, surely they're not all equal priority.
Yeah, that's a good point. Ecosystem thinking, or actually I should say permaculture, opposes dysfunction from capital expenditure. Right? That's something I just read here that's in the definition of what permaculture principles talk about. What do you suppose that means? Permaculture opposes dysfunction from capital expenditure.
That sounds like a neat way of talking about WIP. Having 50 things going on, you're throwing away capital when really you should figure out what you want to focus on, what's the highest priority, where you're going to get the biggest ROI, focus on that.
Right. Ecosystem thinking minimizes WIP so teams can optimize throughput. So very, very analogous to the permaculture principle.
Exactly. If it's not high ROI, why are you doing it?
Right. And both principles, I should say, encourage feedback loops, positive feedback loops, and replication. In permaculture, yields encourage growth of successful systems, right? You get yields, and you're going to be interested in sort of replicating that over time without, again, keeping an ecological balance. In ecosystem thinking, achieving outcomes reinforces and propagates effective team workflow.
There's something that's implied here that's very powerful as well, though. And we see this in ecosystems in the natural world naturally. When the environment changes, the ecosystem changes. It adapts in real time. So the things that are working well, you'll get more of them. The things that are not working well, you get less of them. And it's important to have this dynamic feedback loop, recognizing what is working, and it is going to change. So just mechanically doing the same thing again and again is not going to end well. You have to be responsive to the market, and when it changes, and it will, because that's what markets do, you have to change or you'll be left behind.
Yeah, and I think both of these principles share the emphasis on designing for tangible yields, right?
Yep.
It's not just about superficial outputs. It's about tangible yields, and both share a systems view focused on total productivity and flow. So in that way, they're also aligned.
But don't forget the dynamic nature. They will adjust based on changing conditions.
Right. Good stuff. So that would be principle 3. Anything to add? Anything that we missed? Obtain a yield.
There's some subtlety in that. I think the notion of dynamically respond could be emphasized a bit more, but I think we covered that off.
Okay. Well, then the next ecosystem principle is, let me look it up here real quick. Apply self-regulation and accept feedback. Now, from a ecosystem thinking, from a permaculture thinking perspective, you want to take a stab in describing what that means, Glenn?
Run that by me again. I was reading my notes as well.
Apply self-regulation and accept feedback.
That leads into what we kind of pushed into principle 3.
Well, I can take a stab here from what the little analysis I've done. So feedback is essential, right, to all systems. We thrive. We need feedback to live. In fact, just the simple act of walking requires feedback. We don't realize it, but we're getting feedback all the time so we can stay in balance and not fall over. Mm-hmm. And so as predators keep prey populations in check in nature, that's a form of feedback, right? If you have too many deer or, sort of herbivores eating the plants and so on and so forth, you need something to keep their population at bay so that it doesn't overpopulate and basically turn the savanna into a desert.
Exactly. And which is somewhat analogous to what some industrial farming is doing.
Exactly, right, because we are over farming. Maybe I'll let you talk. Tell me more about that.
Because it's not a ecosystem, it's a monoculture. We're depleting the soil artificially. We're requiring a lot of external inputs, and it's not sustainable. Whereas in nature, everything flows dynamically. If there's I think you said it well. If there's too many deer eating all of the grass, that will not end well. They'll have more. The deer will reproduce without bound, deplete all the grass, turn it into a desert. That's a bad thing. But if you had predators in there, that would keep the deer in check. The deer would not be so brazen. And there's a great video on this around wolves and Yellowstone.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and the wolves were eliminated from Yellowstone, and the herbivore population was out of control, and it was destroying the rivers because they were eating all of the marsh. With wolves, they stay away. They're more cautious and it allowed the river to go and flow. But when the wolves were introduced, they had to modify their behavior, and they wouldn't go into more of these exposed areas around the river, and it allowed the river to replenish. So I was going to say unknowable. That might be a bit strong, but there's a lot of subtle things going on. The deer don't know it. The deer aren't checking to see how many deer they're supposed to have every year. Well, neither are the wolves. They just do what they do. They don't really know about the other than deer watch out for wolves, and wolves eat deer.
Yeah.
But it just takes care of itself, and none of the parts need to know about the big picture. It just works.
Yeah. So relating this to the fourth principle, ecosystem thinking principle, which says align small groups of teams into self-managing business streams that continuously adapt their work priorities to changing market feedback. So if we take the fourth permaculture principle of feedback, and let me just read that one more time, just so that we're all on the same page. And the principle says, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. And the ecosystem thinking principle is align small groups of teams into self-managing business streams that continuously adapt their work priorities to changing market feedback. There are a lot of parallels here that we're talking about. Both emphasize creating self-regulating, and that's the key right there, self-regulating. In a natural system, the wolves aren't thinking, oh, I need to go eat more deer because there's too many of them. They just do what they do. It's a self-managing system. Yep. The deer don't say, oh, I better stop reproducing. There's too many of us. We're not going to have food. No, they're not. They're going to keep eating until there's nothing left to eat, and they all die. Right?
Exactly.
And so the point here is that both of these principles emphasize creating a self-regulating, self-managing system. So you got plants and you've got livestock, and there's enough of each so that they don't overpopulate the other, right? And ecosystem thinking organizes teams into self-managing business streams. Now, what does that What does that mean to you?
It means that they're going to adapt in real time to market conditions. If something is working well, they'll do more of it. If something is not working well, they'll do less of it, or they'll figure out what's wrong with it and change it so that it does do well. Feedback.
Right, exactly.
There is one key point that I would like to add to this principle, and that is reward models and funding.
Mm-hmm.
In order for this to truly be effective and efficient, the streams should be funded directly. They should have a P&L.
That's a good point. One of the points that I sort of researched is this alignment on goals and ethics, right? From a permaculture perspective, it prioritizes the community, if you will, for feedback. You know, how is the environment responding to planting of certain crops, and what sort of livestock needs to be around to keep that in check? Or in the case of agriculture, what combination of plants should be planted together so that it doesn't deplete the soil too much? In fact, it may even enhance the soil because they work in concert. Business streams should align to some set of business ethics and goals. And to your point, there should be some rewards that and reinforce the behavior that leads to a sustainable pace of value delivery.
I'm saying something even stronger. Not just give people a bonus if they go and achieve certain numbers, but actually allow the team to go and make business choices with their own budget, with their own P&L, and adjust the value stream when necessary. So this does imply that the value stream is going to have all of the proficiencies on it. There's going to be marketing people, there's going to be sales people, there's going to be financial people, legal people, everything. But the stream is kind of like a business entity in a way, with a P&L and pivots and adjusts when necessary. But of course, aligned to high-level corporate objectives, particularly including things like goals and ethics, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I think that it relies on a certain level of autonomy in that case, right? So the business stream has its own P&L. It has teams that are self-reliant and autonomous to a large degree. And this autonomy is what makes these business streams robust, correct?
They're also cross-functional.
Yeah.
Yes, they are autonomous, but let's also not forget from one of our earlier talks, they're autonomous, but they're aligned to the corporate objectives. So it's autonomy with alignment. These are not people going rogue. They're still aligned. They just have the freedom to go and pivot when things on the ground change, and they change very quickly these days. Senior leadership doesn't have a chance to hear about these changes, but the people on the ground do, and they can pivot quickly, whereas senior management inherently cannot because they're not on the front line.
Right. I mean, I think the two go hand in hand, that alignment and autonomy, right? So the alignment is provided by the goals, the ethics. The autonomy is afforded by those goals and ethics, because now everyone's aligned to those goals and ethics, and they can operate more or less autonomously in a self-regulated, self-managing manner, so that these teams are producing a yield in a way that these teams are very aware of the feedback that they get from the market. And in the analogy, of course, would be in nature. The feedback would be coming from nature, right? From the soil, from the plants, from the livestock, and so on and so forth. In a market, the feedback is coming from the market.
Yep. And if they have their own P&L, trust me, they're going to be focused.
Yeah. So really, in summary, both of these principles, Principle 4, Permaculture Principle 4, and Ecosystem Principle 4, which is really about self-regulation and feedback, the aim is to create organic, self-managing systems that rely on feedback to adapt and thrive to changing conditions in the environment or the market, right? They rely on decentral while guiding alignment through shared purpose and values. Anything to add to that, Glenn?
These two are relatively easy to get your head around. Some of the other ones are a bit more difficult. They're a bit radical, but they are profound and absolutely necessary if you want to have a sustainable, durable business that responds quickly. And the market is moving at an accelerating pace. So people who do not adopt this model are not going to be in a good place in the fairly near future.
Right. So in summary, we got the two principles we covered. obtain a yield, and self-regulating systems that rely on feedback.
Yep.
So go ahead.
Yeah, and respond to that. Positive.
And respond to that, right? Exactly. And so, in summary, from a ecosystem thinking perspective, from a business perspective, it's about aligning teams, focus on what the most valuable things are that obtain a yield or obtain a result, an outcome for the company.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the teams are largely autonomous, self-regulated, aligned to a common mission, vision, purpose for that business stream. And they're regularly monitoring feedback so that they can continue to obtain a yield.
Yep.
I would suggest that we table this for now and sort of get through all of these principles and draw some parallels between permaculture and ecosystem. And then maybe we can do some research on companies that embody some or all of these principles and bring that as maybe a case study of companies that do, or maybe companies that come close, and what they look like, what their ethos is and how they operate. And maybe you won't find any, I don't know. We'll see. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Glenn, thanks again for being for co-hosting this with me. And we'll see you all in a month where we'll cover principles, let's see, 5 and 6. And I don't know what they are, but you can always look up permaculture principles and see what they are. We'll have a link to both the permaculture principles and the ecosystem thinking principles in the description of this video if you'd like to do some more research on your own. Again, thanks for watching. Bye, everyone.
Bye.